The office of the headmistress smelled of lemon-scented anxiety and old paper. It was a sterile, unforgiving space, designed to make parents feel small and children feel invisible. Alara Vance sat on a chair that was too hard and too low, her posture a perfect, elegant line of defiance. She did not fidget. She did not look at the meticulously curated diplomas on the wall. She kept her gaze fixed on a point just past Mrs. Albright's shoulder, a space in the air where a better world might exist. On the small sofa opposite her, 6-year-old Min Jun was curled into a tight ball, his face buried in the plush fabric. His small shoulders trembled with silent sobs. He had not made a sound since they brought him here, but his grief was a physical presence in the room, a low hum of misery that vibrated against Alara's skin. "As I was saying, Miss Vance," the headmistress began again, her voice a thin, brittle thing, like ice cracking underfoot. She steepled her fingers, a gesture she had likely practiced in a mirror, meant to convey thoughtful authority. It only conveyed condescension. "We have certain protocols. At Northwood Preparatory, we cultivate an environment of clarity, of structure, and when a child in the middle of a school assembly shouts, 'Mommy,' at, well, at the help, it creates a disruption." The words hung in the air, weighted and ugly. The help. Alara felt the term land on her not like a blow, but like a layer of dust, one more coating of indignity on a life that had been covered in it for years. She did not flinch. She did not allow the heat that bloomed in her chest to reach her face. Her expression remained a mask of serene neutrality. She had learned long ago that her silence was a language most people could not understand, and therefore could not defeat. "He was frightened," Alara said. Her voice was low and steady, the kind of voice that could soothe a nightmare or command a room, depending on the volume. Another child pushed him. He fell. "Be that as it may," Mrs. Albright continued, waving a dismissive hand, a diamond cluster ring flashing under the fluorescent lights. "The issue is the utter confusion. It's imperative that children understand proper social structures. Mr. Kwan entrusts us with his son's education, and that includes a proper understanding of his own household. It is frankly inappropriate for him to be forming this kind of attachment." Alara thought about the word attachment. She thought about the last 2 years. She thought about Min Jun arriving at the penthouse, a silent, hollow-eyed child who had just lost his mother in a car accident he had survived, a boy who would not speak, would not eat, would not meet anyone's gaze. She thought about the nights she had spent on the floor of his room, humming lullabies until her throat was raw, just to keep the terrors at bay. She thought about teaching him how to tie his shoes, how to hold a fork, how to say please in 2 languages. She thought about the first time he had smiled, a tiny, fragile thing that felt like the sun breaking through a month of rain. She had been the architect of his healing, the engineer of his small, returning happiness. And this woman, this brittle, polished woman, called it an inappropriate attachment. "Min Jun is a sensitive child," Alara said, her voice still impossibly calm. "He is also very intelligent. He understands my role in his life perfectly." Mrs. Albright's smile was thin as a paper cut. "Clearly not, if he's calling you his mother. We've left a message for Mr. Kwan. He will, of course, want to handle this matter personally. It is his household, after all. We simply cannot have this sort of thing happening. It reflects poorly on the school and on the family." She was working from a version of Alara that had never been accurate. She saw a black woman in a simple, well-tailored but unbranded dress and assumed a story. She saw a maid, a nanny, a line item on a budget. She did not see the woman with a master's degree in architectural history from Columbia, the woman who could discourse on the structural integrity of Gothic cathedrals, the woman who had once been on track to be a partner at a prestigious firm before her life had imploded. She did not see the woman Jinwoo Kwan had specifically sought out, not for his son's laundry, but for his son's soul. Mrs. Albright had not updated the file. Ilara looked at Min Jun, who had risked a peek over the edge of the sofa. His eyes, dark and wide, found hers. They were filled with a misery so profound it was almost adult. He was not just sad. He was ashamed of his outburst, ashamed of the trouble he had caused her. He mouthed her name, a silent, desperate plea. "Ilara." She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I'm here." "It's all right." The silence in the office stretched. Mrs. Albright began tapping a pen on her blotter, a rhythmic, irritating sound that seemed to be counting down the seconds of Ilara's presumed insignificance. The head mistress was performing power, the kind of power that needs an audience, that needs validation. It was loud and hollow. The kind of power that shatters. Ilara's power was different. It was the kind forged in loss and endurance. It was quiet. It was deep. The kind of power that absorbs shocks and holds its shape. The door to the office opened without a knock. The sound of the pen tapping stopped. Mrs. Albright's head snapped up, her face a mask of irritation, ready to chastise whichever subordinate had dared to enter unannounced. But the words died on her lips. Her mouth opened slightly and then closed again. The carefully constructed mask of authority dissolved, replaced by a sudden, flustered uncertainty. Jinwoo Kwon did not enter a room. He subsumed it. He was not a large man, but his presence had a gravitational pull that bent the space around him. He was dressed in a charcoal suit so perfectly tailored it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin. His white shirt was stark against the dark wool, his tie a slash of silver silk. There was not a single wasted element to his appearance, not a hair out of place, not a flicker of emotion on his handsome, sculpted face. He did not rush. He was not performing. His movements were economical, precise, and utterly unhurried. He closed the door behind him with a soft, definitive click that seemed to seal the room off from the rest of the world. The air grew still, heavy. The scent of lemon polish was erased, replaced by something clean and cold, like sandalwood and rain. His eyes, dark and intelligent, swept the room once. They took in the pretentious diplomas, the tense posture of the headmistress, the trembling form of his son on the sofa, and finally they rested on Ilara. For a fraction of a second his gaze held hers, and in that moment 1,000 unsaid words passed between them. It was a look of assessment, of inquiry, and beneath it all, a deep, cold anger that was all the more terrifying for being so utterly contained. "Mr. Kwon," Mrs. Albright said, her voice suddenly an octave higher than before. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Thank you for coming in so promptly. We have a rather delicate situation." Jinwoo's gaze did not leave Ilara. "I heard your message," he said. His voice was a low, quiet rumble, steady as iron wrapped in silk. It was not loud, but it filled every corner of the room. "You said it was an emergency." He then turned his head, a slow, deliberate movement, and looked at the headmistress. He truly looked at her for the first time, and she visibly withered under the intensity of his focus. It was the look of a predator assessing a threat and finding it wanting. "This," he said, his gaze flicking to his son, then back to her, "is not an emergency. It is an inconvenience. And you have inconvenienced me." Mrs. Albright paled. The script she had prepared, the one where she was the firm but understanding authority guiding the wealthy, clueless parent, was useless now. She was fumbling for a new one. "Mr. Kwon, I assure you, the reputation of this institution—" "You spoke of my son's confusion," Jinwoo interrupted, his voice still unnervingly calm. "My son is not confused. He is 6 years old and he was frightened. He called for the person who makes him feel safe. The confusion, Mrs. Albright, appears to be entirely yours." He walked over to the sofa, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the plush carpet. He knelt down, his movements fluid, the perfect crease of his trousers undisturbed. He was now on eye level with his son. "Min-jun," he said softly. The coldness in his voice was gone, replaced by a tone of infinite gentleness. The small boy unfurled, turning to look at his father. Tears streamed down his cheeks. "Appa," he whispered, his voice thick with shame. "I'm sorry." I was bad. You were not bad, Jinwoo said, his voice firm but kind. He reached out and brushed a tear from his son's cheek with his thumb. You were hurt. You called for help. That is what you are supposed to do. He glanced up, his eyes finding Alara's again. You called for family. The word landed in the quiet room with the force of a physical blow. Alara's breath hitched. Family. He had said it. In front of this woman. He had drawn a line in the sand, and he had placed her on his side of it. Jinwoo stood up, his movements once again economical and precise. He looked at Mrs. Albright, who now seemed to have shrunk. The performative power had evaporated, leaving behind a nervous, middle-aged woman in an expensive suit who was suddenly very aware that she was out of her depth. Minjun will not be returning to this office, Jinwoo stated. It was not a request. His record will show a perfect attendance for the day. You will issue a formal, written apology to Miss Vance for the unprofessional and insulting manner in which you have treated her. You will deliver it to my office by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Mrs. Albright's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Mr. Kwan, the board, there are procedures. You seem to believe, Jinwoo said, taking a half-step closer, that your procedures apply to me. You seem to believe that you hold some form of authority here. He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. You have made a severe miscalculation. The apology, by 9. He did not wait for a reply. He turned to Alara. We are leaving. He then extended a hand to Minjun. The boy scrambled off the sofa and took it, his small fingers disappearing into his father's large, capable hand. Jinwoo then looked at Alara, a silent instruction in his eyes. She stood, her legs feeling slightly unsteady. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving a tremor in its wake. As they walked towards the door, Jinwoo leading his son, with Alara following a step behind. He spoke one last time without turning around. And Mrs. Albright, he said, his hand on the doorknob, I am now taking a personal interest in the administration of this institution. I do not think you will enjoy the results of my attention. He opened the door and they walked out into the hallway, leaving the headmistress standing alone in her silent, sterile office, the scent of lemon and failure clinging to the air. The power in the room had not just shifted, it had been dismantled, packed away, and removed from the premises. The ride back to the penthouse was conducted in a thick, humming silence. The interior of the Maybach was a world unto itself, a capsule of soft leather, polished wood, and soundproof glass that sealed them off from the noise and chaos of the city. Minjun, exhausted by his tears and the subsequent relief, had fallen asleep almost instantly, his head lolling onto Alara's lap. His small hand was still loosely curled around 2 of his father's fingers. Jinwoo had not pulled away. Alara stared out the window, watching the blur of buildings and people pass by. Her heart was still beating a little too fast. She kept replaying the scene in the office, Jinwoo's quiet, devastating demolition of Mrs. Albright's authority. She should have felt vindicated, triumphant even. Instead, she felt a deep, unnerving sense of trepidation. She had seen a side of her employer that she had only ever suspected existed. The quiet, reserved man who ate the simple meals she prepared and listened intently when she spoke about her day with his son had been replaced by a sovereign, a man who moved pieces on a board she couldn't even see. She was an employee, a very well-compensated and respected one, to be sure, but an employee nonetheless. And she had just become the focal point of a conflict between her boss and his son's very expensive, very well-connected private school. People like her, people in her position, did not survive such conflicts. They became collateral damage. She braced herself for the conversation that was to come, the one where he would tell her, gently but firmly, that she had become a liability, that for Minjun's sake they would have to find a new arrangement. She will be removed. Jinwoo's voice startled her. He was looking straight ahead, his profile rigid, his hands resting on his knees, but his thumb was gently stroking the back of Minjun's hand. "Pardon?" Alara asked, her voice a little breathless. "Mrs. Albright," he clarified, his gaze still fixed on the road ahead. "She will be gone by the end of the week. The Board of Governors will request her resignation. It will be a quiet, seamless transition. Ilara stared at his reflection in the polished wood of the dashboard. You can do that? For the first time since they left the school, he turned his head to look at her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were intense. I can, he said simply. The finality of it chilled her. It was not a boast. It was a statement of operational capability. He had assessed a problem, and he was now outlining the solution. That seems extreme, she said, choosing her words carefully. What she did was extreme, he countered, his voice dropping a fraction, the cold anger returning. She humiliated you. She frightened my son. She did this in a place where he is meant to feel safe. She weaponized his grief against you both. That is not an administrative error. That is a profound failure of character. It cannot be tolerated. Ilara swallowed. Mr. Kwan, Jin Woo, I appreciate you defending me, but you don't have to dismantle a woman's career on my behalf. I'm used to it. It's not the first time someone has spoken to me that way. It won't be the last. It will be the last time it happens while you are under my protection, he said. The words were not soft. They were hard, like stone. Did you think I hired you to wash his clothes, Ilara? The question caught her off guard. I am his governess. I manage his schedule, his education, his well-being. I have a staff of 20 for this building alone, he said, his gaze unwavering. Any one of them could manage a schedule. I hired you because my son was drowning in silence, and the first time you met him, you did not try to make him speak. You sat with him on the floor, in the quiet, and you started to build a bridge. I hired you because you have a degree in the history of structural forms, and I knew you would understand how to rebuild a broken one. She was floored. He had never mentioned her degree after their initial interview 2 years ago. She had assumed he'd forgotten, or that it had simply been a checkbox on her resume, an indicator of intelligence but irrelevant to the job at hand. To know that he had not only remembered, but had understood its metaphorical significance. It shifted the ground beneath her feet. I was performing a hostile takeover of my son's sorrow, he continued, the corporate metaphor so stark, so him, and I needed the best architect I could find. That was you. He had not hired a nanny. He had headhunted a specialist. The arrangement has changed, he said, his voice quiet again. Today, that woman tried to classify you as the help. She tried to put you in a box that you do not belong in, a box that makes you vulnerable. This is no longer acceptable. From this point forward, your position is no longer that of governess. Here it was. The end. Her heart sank. I see. No, he said, a flicker of something, frustration? Impatience? In his eyes. You don't. I am not firing you, Ilara. I am promoting you. You will be named as a consultant for the Kwan Group's European Development Division. Your work on the preliminary designs for the Berlin project, which you have been doing in your spare time, will now be your official focus. Your salary will be adjusted accordingly. You will have an office downtown. You will, of course, continue to live here. Your primary role, your most important role, will always be Min-jun. But to the outside world, you are a senior architectural consultant to my firm. No one will ever refer to you as the help again. Ilara could not speak. Her throat felt tight. The sheer audacity of his solution, the scale of it, was breathtaking. He wasn't just shielding her. He was recontextualizing her entire existence within his world. He was giving her armor. He was giving her status. He was giving her back a piece of the life she thought she had lost forever. Why? She finally managed to whisper. Jinwoo looked from her face down to his son, sleeping peacefully in her lap. His expression softened, the hard edges momentarily blurring. Because Min-jun called you Mom, he said softly. He did not do it by mistake. He did it because, in the architecture of his 6-year-old heart, that is the space you occupy. He chose you, and I do not allow anyone to threaten my family. He turned his gaze back to the window, the conversation apparently concluded. They drove the rest of the way in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was not the tense, anxious quiet from before. This was the kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles. It was the silence of things finally being put in their correct place. Ilara looked down at Minjun, at his innocent, sleeping face, and gently stroked his hair. For the first time in a very long time, she felt the faint, unfamiliar stirring of hope. She was no longer just enduring. She was being defended. She was being seen. The days that followed were a study in quiet transformation. The penthouse, which had once felt like a luxurious but temporary way station in her life, began to feel like home. It was no longer just the place she worked. It was the place she was safe. The change was subtle, more a shift in atmosphere than in action. The household staff, always polite, now treated her with a new level of deference. They were loyal to Jinwoo, and he had, with his actions, declared her an integral part of his inner circle. Ms. Choi, Jinwoo's terrifyingly efficient executive assistant, called her to arrange the delivery of a new corporate credit card and a portfolio of building plans. It was all handled with a brisk, professional warmth that left no room for questions. The written apology from Mrs. Albright arrived precisely at 8:55 a.m. the next morning, delivered by a panicked-looking courier. It was a masterpiece of groveling legalese, but Ilara barely glanced at it before leaving it on the marble island in the kitchen. It was an artifact from a battle that had already been won. It held no power over her. Jinwoo was a man of immense, almost invisible action. He did not speak of what he was doing regarding the school, but the ripples reached her anyway. She overheard Ms. Choi on the phone in the hallway, her voice a stiletto of polite inquiry, asking a contact at the city's land registry office about the deed for the Northwood Preparatory campus. A few days later, a financial report was accidentally left on the coffee table, and Ilara saw a line item for the acquisition of a controlling stake in a small private bank that, she later discovered, held the school's endowment mortgage. He was not just removing a problematic headmistress. He was acquiring the entire infrastructure of her power. He was buying the ground she stood on. Their evenings fell into a new rhythm. After she and Jinwoo had put Minjun to bed, a ritual they now shared, they would often find themselves in the vast living room. The space was dominated by a wall of glass that offered a breathtaking, godlike view of the city's glittering skyline. In the past, she would have retreated to her own suite of rooms. Now, she stayed. He would pour them both a small glass of whiskey, a peaty, smoky scotch that warmed her from the inside out. He never pushed her to talk, but he created a space for it. He would unroll blueprints for the new Berlin headquarters onto the massive coffee table, the same designs she had been sketching out for him as a hobby for the past year. "The western facade feels unbalanced," he would say, his finger tracing a line on the paper. "What do you see?" And she would talk. She would speak about sightlines and load-bearing walls, about the interplay of light and shadow, about how a building's entrance should feel like an invitation, not a challenge. She spoke of the Bauhaus movement, of Gropius and Mies van der Rohe, the part of her brain that had been dormant for years, the part that knew the language of steel and glass and concrete, woke up and stretched. He would listen, his dark eyes fixed on her face, his attention absolute. He was not humoring her. He was consulting her. He valued her intellect, not just her capacity for care. In these quiet, late-night conversations, surrounded by the sleeping city, a new kind of intimacy began to grow. It was not the fiery, passionate thing she saw in movies. It was quieter, deeper. It was a bond forged in mutual recognition. He saw the brilliant architect trapped inside the governess. She saw the fiercely protective father hidden within the ruthless Mafia boss. They were two lonely, complicated people who had found in each other a place of profound, unspoken understanding. One evening, as they were looking over the plans, her hand brushed against his as she reached for her glass. A jolt, small but electric, passed between them. She pulled her hand back quickly, a blush rising on her cheeks. He did not move, but his gaze intensified. "I do not leave because things become complicated, Ilara," he said, his voice low. It was a non sequitur, yet she understood him perfectly. He was referencing a conversation they'd had months ago where she had confessed that she always left relationships when they started to get difficult. It had been her pattern, a defense mechanism against getting hurt. "I know," she said softly. "This is complicated," he stated, his eyes holding hers. "I have no intention of leaving." It was not a declaration of love. It was a statement of intent, a promise of stability. For Alara, who had built her life on the shifting sands of temporary arrangements and quiet endurance, it was more romantic than any poem. It was the promise of solid ground. But the world outside the penthouse continued to turn. Mrs. Albright, it turned out, was not the type to go quietly. Deprived of her position and her public standing, she became venomous. She had miscalculated the scale of Jinwoo's power, but not the nature of the society she lived in. She began to whisper. To old friends on charity boards, to journalists who owed her favors. The whispers were ugly, racially charged, and designed for maximum damage. She painted a picture of a naive, grieving foreign billionaire being manipulated by a cunning, ambitious black woman. She hinted at entrapment, at an inappropriate relationship, at a woman who had somehow bewitched both father and son. The first sign of trouble was a call from a gossip columnist, which Ms. Choi handled with lethal efficiency. The second was the arrival of an invitation to the Northwood Preparatory Founders Gala. It was addressed to Mr. Jinwoo Kwan and guest. It was a trap, and they both knew it. The gala was the crown jewel of the city's old money social scene, a place where reputations were made and broken over champagne and canapes. Mrs. Albright would be there. Her allies would be there. It would be her stage for a final public stand. She was counting on Jinwoo to either leave Alara at home, thus validating the rumors that she was something to be hidden, or to bring her and walk her into an ambush of 1,000 judging eyes and poisoned whispers. Alara held the thick, cream-colored card in her hand. Her first instinct was to retreat, to hide, to protect herself and to protect Jinwoo from the ugliness that would surely ensue. "I don't have to go," she said, placing the invitation on the counter. "It would be better if I didn't." Jinwoo took the invitation and, without looking at it, tore it in half and dropped the pieces into the wastebasket. "We are attending," he said. He looked at his watch. "My personal shopper will be here in an hour. Tell her what you require." He then looked at her, a rare, almost imperceptible softening around his eyes. "Choose something beautiful, Alara. Choose something that makes you feel powerful." He was not asking her to walk into a fight. He was inviting her to a coronation, her own. The night of the Founders' Gala, the air in the penthouse was thick with anticipation. Alara stood before the full-length mirror in her bedroom, a space that was larger and more luxurious than any apartment she had ever been able to afford on her own. The woman staring back at her was someone she barely recognized, yet felt more like herself than she had in years. The gown was a masterpiece of architectural precision. It was not the frothy, princess-like confection many women would choose. It was a column of deep, emerald green silk that fell from a single, elegantly draped shoulder to the floor. The color was rich and bold, the color of old money and deep forests. It clung to her graceful figure, highlighting her strength rather than her fragility. Her hair was swept up in an intricate style that exposed the elegant line of her neck and shoulders. The only jewelry she wore were a pair of simple, brilliant diamond studs, a gift from Jinwoo that had been left on her dresser with a simple, unsigned note. "Tonight, they will see you." She was not a nanny in a pretty dress. She was not a prop. She was a statement. This dress, this night, it was armor forged from silk and confidence. When she walked into the living room, Jinwoo was waiting by the window, staring out at the city. He was dressed in a classic black tuxedo, the sharp lines of which made him look even more formidable than usual. He turned as she approached, and for a moment he did not speak. His eyes traveled over her, from the top of her head to the hem of her gown, and the cool neutrality of his expression gave way to something else, something deep and unguarded. It was pure, unadulterated admiration. "You are magnificent," he said, his voice a low murmur. The compliment, so simple and so sincere, landed in her heart like a warm stone. "You chose well," she replied, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "The shopper has excellent taste." "The shopper brought what she was told," he corrected gently. "The vision was mine." He held out his arm. "Shall we?" She took his arm, the fine wool of his jacket warm beneath her fingers. As they walked towards the elevator, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. She was not walking into an ambush. She was walking onto a stage of her own choosing, beside a man who had built the stage itself. The ballroom of the hotel where the gala was held was a cavern of shimmering crystal and hushed, expensive chatter. It was a sea of glittering gowns, perfectly tailored tuxedos, and brittle, calculating smiles. The moment Alara and Jinwoo entered, a subtle shift occurred. Conversations faltered, heads turned. A wave of whispers followed them as they moved through the room, Jinwoo's hand resting lightly but possessively on the small of her back. Alara kept her head high, her gaze fixed forward. She could feel the stares, the weight of 100 judgments. She could almost hear the questions hanging in the air. Who is she? Is that the woman from the rumors? What does he see in her? But the whispers did not touch her. Jinwoo's presence was a shield, his calm authority a force field that deflected the petty malice of the crowd. He navigated the room with the unhurried grace of a man who owned it, which, Alara suspected, he probably did in some literal financial sense. He led her to a secluded table near the back, procured 2 glasses of champagne from a passing waiter, and sat down opposite her. He seemed completely unbothered by the attention they were drawing. He was not ignoring it. He was simply above it. He seems warm," Ilara commented dryly, nodding towards a portly man on the other side of the room who had been staring at her with undisguised hostility since they arrived. Jinwoo followed her gaze. "That is Arthur Pennington," he said, his voice devoid of interest. "His construction firm has been trying to win the bid for our new downtown tower for 6 months. He will not be successful." He took a sip of his champagne. "He believes a public display of disapproval towards you will curry favor with the old guard. He is incorrect." It was all a game of power, and she was finally beginning to understand the rules. They sat for nearly an hour, a small island of stillness in the swirling social eddy. People approached, of course. Business associates of Jinwoo's, fawning politicians, women with eyes as hard as the diamonds on their fingers. He introduced Alara to each of them with the same unwavering title. "This is Alara Vance, a lead consultant with my firm." He said it with such casual, unimpeachable authority that no one dared to question it. He was rewriting her reality in real time and forcing everyone in the room to accept the new narrative. Then she appeared. Mrs. Albright was holding court near the grand staircase. A circle of sympathetic-looking matrons gathered around her. She was dressed in a pale gold dress that was both expensive and unflattering. She had the look of a martyr, a woman wronged, and she was playing it to the hilt. When she saw Jinwoo and Alara, her face hardened. The moment she had been waiting for had arrived. Excusing herself from her circle, she began to walk towards their table. Her movements were deliberate, her head held high. This was her final, desperate gambit. She was going to force a public confrontation. She was going to call their bluff. "Showtime," Ilara murmured into her glass. Jinwoo did not even turn to look. He simply placed his hand over hers on the table. His touch was warm, steady, an anchor in the coming storm. "Breathe," he said quietly, "and watch." Mrs. Albright stopped before their table, her posture rigid with self-righteous fury. She ignored Alara completely, addressing herself only to Jinwoo. Her voice was loud enough to carry, to draw the attention of the surrounding tables. "Mr. Kwan," she began, her tone dripping with false concern, "I am so glad I caught you. I was just speaking with the board chairman. We are all deeply concerned about the situation, about the undue influence this woman seems to have over you and your son. There are moral obligations, Mr. Kwan, a duty of care." The words were carefully chosen, undue influence, moral obligations. She was publicly accusing him of being a fool and Ilara of being a predator. The nearby conversations died down. All eyes were on them. This was the moment of truth. Jinwoo took a slow, deliberate sip of his champagne. He placed the glass back on the table with a soft click. Then, and only then, did he raise his eyes to meet Mrs. Albright's. The look he gave her was not angry. It was not emotional at all. It was the look of a scientist observing a specimen just before dissection. It was utterly, terrifyingly cold. "Mrs. Albright," he said, his voice no louder than a murmur, yet it cut through the silence like a shard of glass. "You speak of obligation. Let us discuss obligation." He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo and pulled out not a weapon, but a phone. With a few taps of his thumb, he brought something up on the screen and placed it flat on the table, facing her. "This," he said, "is the title deed for the land on which Northwood Preparatory is built. My family foundation acquired it 3 weeks ago. You are standing tonight on my property." Mrs. Albright's face went slack. The color drained from her cheeks. "This," he continued, swiping the screen, "is a confirmation of a wire transfer. My holding company has purchased, at a significant premium, the entirety of the school's outstanding debt from the 3 financial institutions that held it. The endowment, the expansion loan, everything. The school now owes me, personally, a sum of $112 million. A collective gasp went through the nearby listeners. Ilara stared at him, her own shock mirroring theirs. She had known he was taking action, but the scale of it, the totality of it, was beyond anything she could have imagined. "And this," Jinwoo said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming even more chillingly precise, "is a list. It contains the names of the 5 remaining members of the Board of Governors who still supported you. Beside each name is a summary of a certain indiscretion, tax evasions, adulterous affairs, illicit business dealings. Information that would be very damaging if it were to become public. In the last hour, I have received the resignations of all 5 men. They have been replaced by 3 of my own lawyers and 2 of my senior executives. As of 90 minutes ago, Mrs. Albright, the board that governs you is my board. You have no allies left." He switched off the phone and placed it back in his pocket. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze pinning the now trembling woman in place. "You came here tonight to question my judgment and to slander the woman I have chosen to be a part of my family," he said, his voice a blade of ice. "You believed your social standing gave you power. You were wrong. Your power was a performance, and the stage it was built on now belongs to me. Your career at Northwood is over. Your time in this city's society is over. You have been audited, Mrs. Albright, and your accounts have been found wanting." The carefully constructed facade of the former headmistress did not just crack. It exploded. Her face crumpled, the mask of righteous indignation melting away to reveal the raw, terrified woman beneath. A strangled sob escaped her lips. Her body seemed to fold in on itself. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "You can't. I have—" "You have nothing," Jinwoo stated, his voice flat and final. "You are a guest at my event, on my property, and you are no longer welcome." He gave a small, almost invisible nod. From the edges of the room, 2 men in dark suits, their presence so discreet Ilara hadn't even noticed them before, began to move towards the table. They moved without wasted motion, their faces impassive. They were his men. Mrs. Albright looked around wildly, seeking an ally, a friendly face, a lifeline. She found none. The people who had been her friends moments before now looked away, their faces a mixture of fear and fascination. They did not want to be associated with this spectacular public ruin. As the 2 men reached her, one on each side, she let out a guttural cry of despair and her knees buckled. She would have collapsed onto the floor, but they caught her, holding her up by her arms. She began to sob uncontrollably, great, heaving, ugly sounds that echoed in the stunned silence of the ballroom. They did not drag her. They simply lifted, half carrying the weeping woman as they escorted her out of the room, her gold dress trailing on the polished floor behind her. They moved through the crowd, which parted for them like the Red Sea, and disappeared through a side exit. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. They had just witnessed a public execution, carried out not with a weapon, but with a balance sheet. Jinwoo picked up his champagne glass as if nothing had happened. He turned to Alara, his eyes now clear of the chilling cold, holding only a quiet concern for her. "Are you all right?" he asked. She looked at him, at this impossible man who had just dismantled a person's entire world with a few quiet words and a cell phone. She thought of the years of quiet indignities, the casual cruelties, the constant feeling of being underestimated and undervalued, and she felt a slow, profound, and deeply cathartic sense of peace settle over her. It was the feeling of a great weight being lifted, not just from her shoulders, but from her soul. A genuine smile reached her eyes for the first time that night. A real smile. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I think I am." He nodded, satisfied. Then he stood up, holding out his hand to her. "Come," he said. "There is someone I want you to meet." He led her not away from the crowd, but towards the center of it, towards the very spot where Mrs. Albright's supporters had been gathered. An elderly, distinguished-looking man stood there, watching them approach with a look of shrewd appraisal. It was Arthur Pennington, the man whose hostile stares Alara had noted earlier. He looked decidedly less hostile now. He looked nervous. "Mr. Pennington," Jinwoo said, his voice resonating with calm authority. "I believe you have not been properly introduced." He turned slightly, presenting Alara to the man as if she were a queen. "I would like to introduce Alara Vance," he announced, his voice carrying easily through the silent room. "She has been, for the last 2 years, the most capable person in every room she has entered, though few have had the wisdom to see it. She is also the lead architectural designer for the Kwan Group's new Berlin headquarters. In fact, we were just discussing the many structural and aesthetic flaws of this very ballroom. Her insights are, as always, brilliant." He paused, letting the words sink in. He was not just giving her a title. He was giving her credit. He was giving her a history. He was telling the entire world that her value was not something he had bestowed upon her, but something that had been inherent in her all along. He then looked directly at Pennington, a glint of steel in his eyes. "Miss Vance will be overseeing the final selection process for the downtown tower project next month. I trust you will give her proposal the respect it deserves." Pennington, who had gone pale, could only stammer. "Of course, absolutely. An honor, Miss Vance. A true honor." Alara met the man's gaze, her expression serene, and gave him a slight, regal nod. She did not offer her hand. The spell was broken. The room came back to life, but the atmosphere had been irrevocably altered. The power dynamics had been redrawn in stark, undeniable lines. Alara Vance was no longer a mystery. She was a power player, the right hand of the most formidable man in the room. She was not his weakness. She was his queen. They did not stay much longer. They had done what they came to do. As they walked out of the ballroom, the whispers that followed them were of a different sort now. They were whispers of awe, of fear, of respect. Alara felt Jinwoo's hand on her back, a steady, reassuring pressure. She had walked into this room feeling like a target. She was leaving it feeling like a fortress. The silence in the car on the way home was a comfortable, shared space. The tension of the evening had dissolved, leaving behind a quiet sense of victory and exhaustion. Alara leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, watching the city lights streak by like fallen stars. "Thank you," she said softly, not looking at him. "For what?" he asked. "For seeing me," she replied, "when no one else did." He was quiet for a long moment. "It would have been impossible not to," he said finally. When they arrived back at the penthouse, the lights were low. A single lamp cast a warm glow over the living room. The blueprints for the Berlin project were still unrolled on the coffee table. It felt like a lifetime ago that they had been looking at them. Ilara slipped off her heels with a sigh of relief. She walked over to the great glass wall and looked out at the sprawling city below. The view had always been beautiful, but tonight it looked different. It no longer looked like his city. It looked like their city. Jinwoo came to stand beside her, his presence a familiar comfort. He had taken off his tuxedo jacket and loosened his tie. He looked less like a sovereign now, and more like a man. Her man. "So, she is already annoyed," he said, his voice laced with a rare, dry wit. "She gets that from you." Ilara turned, confused. "Who?" He gestured with his head towards the hallway that led to the bedrooms. "Our daughter. She has decided she does not like the new nanny. She says the woman's voice is too high." It took a moment for the words to register. Our daughter. He had said it so casually, so naturally. Minjun. Ilara corrected automatically, a faint smile on her lips. Our son. Him too, Jinwoo agreed, the corners of his mouth twitching upwards in what was almost a smile. A comfortable silence fell between them, filled with the unspoken truths that now lay bare. The pretense of their employer-employee relationship had been burned away in the fire of the gala, leaving something purer, something stronger in its place. He reached out and took her hand. His fingers laced through hers, his palm warm and firm against her own. It was not a gesture of passion, but of partnership. It was an anchor, a promise. "You are safe here, Ilara," he said, his voice a low, solemn vow. "With me. Always." She looked up at him, into his dark, intense eyes, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe it completely. The quiet exhaustion of long-term suffering, the constant, low-grade fear that had been her companion for years, it was gone. In its place was a warm, steady peace, the feeling of being correctly placed, the feeling of being home. "I know," she whispered. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her emerald dress rustling softly. They stood there for a long time, hand in hand, two complicated souls who had found their sanctuary in each other, looking out at the glittering expanse of their future. The story was not over. There was no simple happily ever after for people like them, but it was a new beginning, an earned beginning, a family built not on convention but on complication, on resilience, and on the quiet, daily choice to stay. And for Ilara Vance, that was more than enough. It was everything.